The New York City Outlaws collection was published last month by Floating World Comics. This is a collection of the 5-issue series that was published between 1984 and 1987, written by Bob Hushnar. Hushnar, I believe is pronounced. If I assassinate, I apologize. And drawn by Ken Landgraf. And Ken Landgraf's art has had a second act because it was discussed and featured on Cartoonist Kayfabe over the past 2 or 3 years. So I believe a couple years ago, Apocalypse 5000, which was a comic book one-shot that Ken Landgraf drew, was published. I got a copy of that and I enjoyed it. And so this was solicited last year in 2023, and I've been looking forward to this since then. And this is one of the comics that came out of that 1980s black and white and self-published boom. And this is considered one of the best of that whole genre. It's funny because in the 1980s, I was reading comics. I was reading superheroes, but I was reading comics. And either I just missed this or my stores didn't carry it. But I was really oblivious to this whole explosion until much later. So it's kind of weird for me to go back and say, oh, let me look at all this stuff that existed, but I didn't even know existed at the time. And it's a very well done book. I mean, nice table of contents, a forward by with Jim Rugg, or by Jim Rugg, excuse me. And then it includes the entire comics, which is the covers, the ads. Ken Landgraf and I guess the team would sell ads, and Ken Landgraf would do all the art. And the New York City Outlaws is essentially a team of 7 people that are vigilantes fighting crime. They're not superpowered. They didn't get any superpowers. They just have either trained or just naturally strong. And you got that whole 80s vibe with the open chest, the leather, the spikes. And apparently the writer who came up with the story was influenced by the movie The Warriors that came out in 1979 that was also set in New York, just like the comic is. Ken Landgraf said that he never saw the movie until many years later, so he really wasn't influenced at all by that comic. But it has a little bit of that vibe. It doesn't copy it, but you can kind of see where a comic like this would come out of that universe. Because I saw The Warriors back when it came out in 1979, I believe. And so it's an interesting look because this is from the New York City of the early 80s, not the Disney-fied, gentrified, much safer New York City, but from the New York City that was the biggest, one of the most famous cities in the world, but at the same time was grim and gritty. This is the New York City of Frank Miller's Daredevil, and where it could be very dangerous on the subways, and crime really was an issue. So from that, this is created. And so it's basically, the first issue is your origin book, and it shows, why they're teaming up to fight crime and to, avenge innocents that have been either injured or killed by, and at this time it was the mob, mostly the mob. Later on you get into, like, other people get into ninjas. And there's a certain freedom because it's self-published, but it's not crazy freedom. Like, it's not like, oh my God, you're rolling your eyes kind of thing. It's fun. It's like a superhero-ish kind of book, but more grounded in reality, if that makes sense. There's also backup stories that were included in the first issues, like The King of Punk, because punk rock came out of New York City by the Ramones, 1974. They started that movement. So this book still has that kind of, like, even though punk rock phased into new wave by the very late 70s, very early 80s, 80, 81, mainly in New England, actually, but this still has a bit of that punk attitude. And what I like about this is that, as I mentioned before, it contains the ads. This is an ads for a chain called Captain Jack's. It was gourmet popcorn. But when you have all these books like this, it becomes a collection, but more than a collection, almost like a time capsule of, like, this is the comics that are being made independently in New York City in the mid 80s. Here you have issue 2. Issue 2 was printed in using white, black, and red, and a lot of zipatone that Ken Landgraf said that he would cut precisely to get that look. Zipatone, you can't find it anymore. They don't make it anymore. So the second issue is very interesting. This is the original, I think, Black, White, and Blood that everybody seems to copy now. This is a fun story, and there's a tight continuity between all the issues, despite it taking that many years for the 5 issues to come out. So when you read the second issue, it follows on right after the first, and the third after the second. So it's not like it's lost any steam. You know, some of these great visuals here. Just really interesting art, a lot of ink. I wouldn't say it reminds me of Spain Rodriguez, but, you know, people talk about artists now that sling a lot of ink, and Paul Pope got fame. He slung a lot of ink. Ken Landgraf was slinging a lot of ink, especially in these earlier issues. More ads. And then it went back to pure black and white. I just love these crazy 2-page spreads with all this stuff going on. And the entire series goes about that way, and it finishes with the issue 5. And let me get to the back. This is a pinup by Ben Mara. And this is an interview with Ken Landgraf. And the interview with Ken Landgraf is really interesting because you know, he served in Vietnam. He started self-publishing comics when he was like 12 years old. And he's actually, back in the day, you could actually have a correspondence with comics creators. So he actually had a correspondence with Steve Ditko, and Steve Ditko drew this cover for one of his self-published independent books, which is wild. This could never happen today. He talks about when he was young, waiting for Stan Lee to come out of the Marvel offices and asking him a question. Just that kind of access to these comics creators, which is impossible now, but was possible then. It's just kind of a whole other world. He talks about how he served 2 tours in Vietnam, and then after that, he got to the GI Bill, was able to go to SVA, and learning from guys like Elder, and just really wanting to learn. He had an association and friendship and a mentorship relationship with Gil Kane. Just really interesting insight into what it took to be a comics artist in that period of the 70s, late 70s into the early and mid 80s. It's just a really fascinating look. And I think this interview alone is really just a great read. And then at the end, you have this promo. This is very influenced by the Warriors, this look. But the covers are printed here in full color. I'm not sure why they weren't included here. It might be a printing issue, or maybe it was just easy to print and insert issues at the end. But these are full color covers. I love this use of colors. I love the yellow sky in the background, the American flag here, and then the red background and blue. I just really enjoy this just really powerful, wild art. And then you have the end of the book and the back end. This is a really well-made book. The paper is great. The printing is great. Binding is great. It came shrink wrapped, which I really liked, and you don't really see very often with graphic novels or trade paperbacks. It kept the book nice and flat. The book still lays nice and flat, even though I've read it. And if you're into that early 80s, mid 80s, black and white explosion, I think you'll really dig this. If you're a fan of the Warriors or the Mad Max movies of the early 80s or Escape from New York, anything like that, I think you'll dig this. And if you read this back in the day, I think this is a nice collection to have if you don't have those original comics. I really enjoyed this. It was just this, as I said, it was a nice time capsule, but it was good. It was good to read. I enjoyed it. It is definitely not the type of comic that I would normally pick up, but I'm glad I did. And like I said, I saw this cover and I thought, okay, something about this looks cool, so I'm just going to pick it up. And it's just one of those things where you see a cover and for whatever reason it speaks to you. So I would get it. It's $29.99. You can get it at any comic book store. You can get it at a bookstore. I think it's really a lot of fun. And it's from an era long gone by because New York City is gentrified, cleaned up, and ready for the masses. It is not the 1980s that spurred this and a lot of other great content. So hope you enjoy it. Hope you get a chance to read it. Thanks.